meeting for the school year 2023-2024. I am Dr. Zipporah Miller, Chair of the committee and the District 5 representative of the Prince George's County Board of Education. If everybody could now please introduce themselves, starting with the Vice Chair of this committee, committee members and board members, Prince George's County administrative staff, and the board office staff.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I'm Pamela Boozer-Strother, the Vice Chair of the Academic Achievement Committee and the board member for District 3.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Brandon Jackson, board member District 3. 6, excuse me.
Good evening, everyone. I am Judy Mickens-Murray, ex officio member of this committee and chair of the board.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Judy White, Chief Academic Officer.
Good evening. I'm Kia McDaniel, Director of Curriculum and Instruction.
Good evening, Jamie Bowers, Director of Testing, Research, and Evaluation.
Evening, Anthony Whittington, Director, Monitoring and Accountability.
Good evening, my name is Rosa Lopez. I'm the Board Office Administrative Secretary.
Good evening again, and thank you everybody for being here. Ms. Lopez, could you please call the roll?
Dr. Zipporah Miller.
Present.
Ms. Boozer-Strother.
Present.
Mr. Jackson.
Present.
Mrs. Lasalle Frazier. Mr. Murray. And we have ex officio Mrs. Mickens-Murray.
I believe we have a quorum, so we can move forward. May I have a motion to adopt the December 11th, 2023 meeting agenda?
I move to adopt the December 11th, 2023 meeting agenda.
Is there a second?
I need your second, Brandon.
Second.
Board Member Jackson, sorry.
All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Okay, so the agenda is adopted. May I have a motion to approve the November 13th, 2023 meeting minutes?
I make a motion to approve the November 13th, 2023 meeting minutes.
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. The agenda is adopted. And so now we'll move over to public comment. We do have 2 registered public comment speakers this evening. So Ms. Lopez, do you let them in now, or should I go over the guidelines first?
You can go over the guidelines while I will transfer her as a panelist. So far, Ms. Milhouse is here.
Okay. For the registered speakers, you have been registered to speak in a public comment forum where the Academic Achievement Committee will listen to your comments. The committee will not address your comments. All registered speakers will have 3 minutes to make their presentation. Registered speakers must not relinquish any part of their speaking time to any other registered or unregistered individuals. Speakers may not address individuals or issues with profanity or derogatory terms. You'll be warned once. If you continue, your comments will be muted and you'll be removed from the meeting. Speakers are encouraged to use titles rather than names. For example, superintendent, principal, board member, so on and so forth. Your adherence to these guidelines will enable the public participation process to move smoothly. So right now, I will call the first speaker. So is Courtney Taylor in the waiting room?
No, not yet, Dr. Miller. Ms. Milhouse is here, and she has been also promoted in case you would like to take her first.
Okay, that will be perfect. So we'll take Miss Millhouse first, and then when Courtney comes, we'll take her right after that. So Miss Millhouse, you have 3 minutes. Miss Lopez will begin the time as soon as you begin speaking.
Good evening, everyone. I do apologize. I just came in from picking up my child, but thank you for having me here today. I am here to encourage you all. Please hear what I'm saying. I know I'm not supposed to say names, but Curriculum and Instruction Department, as well as testing. Miss Jamie Bowers and her team, I'm sorry, y'all get me for it. They are doing an amazing job. And I need you all to know, if we could focus on using the approach of increasing data literacy for parents, this would really help us identify how we can bring parents on to be partners in education and closing academic gaps. Over the last 5 years, I have been using the benchmark data. I've been using the MCAP data, and really trying to get a good understanding how to utilize the individual student reports to really help me tailor the work that I'm doing at home to support my children. I can say with all of the resources that PGCPS has, with the tutoring services, the Book Nook, the math small group, as well as the individual one-on-one services, I've been actually able to close both my students' academic gaps. And what I do know is this has come with the help of working very closely with Ms. Bowers and her team, as well as instruction, curriculum and instruction. And I will say, if we can put a lot of those resources that I've been able to gather individually and package that information and teach parents how to use that data, we will see huge strides. We have the information, we have the resources, we just need to package it and get it into parents' hands. I do appreciate that Jamie and her team offered to do a data literacy seminar for parents. I need you all to get behind that. That would be amazing if we could do something that would bring this information, put it in the hands of parents, let parents understand how to read this data, then take that data and then align it with the resources that PGCPS offers to provide the additional support and resources to parents, so we can push the extension of learning from the classroom into the home and cycle it back into the classroom. So I want to applaud my teachers for the information that they're giving me. I want to applaud the staff at my kids' school for using the apps and really pushing that data when my children are able to see what items that they need to focus on, and then I get to see it. But it helps me then take that information, package it with the tutor, then go back to the teacher to say, hey, this is what I'm noticing at home. What are you seeing? But the more equipped we get parents on understanding how to use the data for these administrative or these comprehensive tests, the better equipped the parent can be to provide information to the teacher, as well as making sure that when we're talking about small group instruction, we can really tailor that small group instruction, because not only are we looking at the content, but we're also able to look at how that student is learning. That's my comment for today. Thank you all, and I'm sorry I had to rush through that.
Thank you. Can we now have Miss Courtney Taylor? Is she available, Miss Lopez?
No, Dr. Miller, she's not present yet.
Okay, so that said, we'll just move on to discussion item 3.0. And I will now yield the floor to Dr. Judith White, Chief Academic Officer, to present her team and move forward with this evening's agenda.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to have both curriculum instruction on the call, as well as accountability. The teams collaborate really well as we work one hand in hand with the other in grabbing data and making adjustments. So tonight, as promised, we try to come twice a year with all data sources that we have. You've heard Jamie mention that while we have to give you a presentation in advance, there's 2 extra slides that I think to where we were able to get our benchmark data, and she wants to just at least share the high leverage because we have it and we don't want to, not present what we have. So that will be a bonus. So we're going to start there with DIBELS. I know we're going to talk about grades because grades are based on tasks provided, and we always like to show a trend of where we are and where we've come from and where we are. So I'm going to turn it over to Jamie. Presenting with her will be Anthony Whittington, and my colleague, Dr. Strader, is on the call because, of course, his team is presenting, and so I turn it over to them.
Thank you. So I'm going to share our DIBELS beginning of year data with you. And then the last 3 slides, we just did some cleanup of our benchmark data. The window just closed right before Thanksgiving. So I wanted to share just a preliminary overview of that information too. So just a few background pieces of information about our DIBELS. Our beginning of year window opens in September and it closes October 17th. Right when we return from break is when our middle of year window opens, and that is open for about a month from January to February. And then our end of year or spring window is open from May 13th to June 3rd. And then I hope to be back with you sometime in the late spring to share with you our middle of year and end of year DIBELS data. So overall, we have, as of October 23rd, we had about a 97% completion rate for our DIBELS assessment. Almost 38,000 of our students in K through 3 took our DIBELS assessment, 32 of our schools with 100% completion rate. And then our schools who offer Spanish, we also administer our Lectora DIBELS, and we had a completion rate of 87% and a little over 1,000 students that took that version of the assessment. These are the DIBELS 8 measures that are assessed. We have our phoneme segmentation fluency, our nonsense word fluency, our word reading fluency, our oral reading fluency, our maze, and then we're going to talk this evening about composite scores, which is a combination of scores from all of those above measures, which provides an overall estimate of early literacy skills or reading proficiency on our DIBELS assessments. So looking at our beginning of year data, I have really positive news to report. And so what we're looking at is the red, yellow, green, and blue bars. The red and the yellow are representative of our students who were below or approaching the benchmark. Our green and our blue are students who are representative of students who are at or above the benchmark. So what we're looking at is our last year's beginning of year data is on the top bar in each grade level, and our current beginning of year data is the bottom bar. And so what we're seeing is an improvement across every single grade level from last year's at and above benchmark to where we are now with this year's at and above benchmark. So just to point out, our first graders actually saw the largest amount of growth. So that is really promising. That means that those students who went through a whole year of kindergarten last year actually came out and showed improvement as first graders. That's very positive news to see. So our first grade actually grew by 10 percentage points of our students who were at and above. Our third graders grew about 8 percentage points. Our kindergartners grew about 6 percentage points, and our second graders grew about 5 percentage points. And so what we're looking at here again is our composite score. So that is a combination of all of the measures that each of those grade levels take and gives you an overall score in DIBELS. So very positive news to see. Our Lectora is very similar, where we're seeing our students who were below and approaching the benchmark improving or decreasing from last year, and we're seeing more students who are taking our Lectora, our Spanish version of the assessment, doing better as well.
And Jamie, our immersion students are the ones that take the Lectora, correct? Just providing context for those members who may not know that.
Yes. So we also like to look at who are our students in that yellow band, who are students who are approaching proficiency, our students who are maybe not performing as well on our nonsense word fluency or our oral reading fluency or our phoneme segmentation. So who are those students and how close are they to being at benchmark? So if you look at the table below, those are the total number of testers in this first column who were 6 composite points or less away from being identified at the benchmark, which is that green bar. So the number of testers who were 6 points away are in the second column here. And then our percentage of those who were close. So I wanted to point out this last column is actually last year's data at this very same time. So you notice this third column of 34 percentage points, 76 percentage points, 54 percentage points, and 38 are also increases from last year, which means that we have a lot more students who are in that approaching band who are much closer to the or the green bar than we had last year. So another really good trend that we're looking at of our early learners in every single grade level. So I just wanted to point that to you as well. So this looks at our 4 key measures in DIBELS. It looks at phonemic awareness, which is only administered to students in K and 1. Our decoding, our nonsense word fluency, which is administered to our students in K through 3. Our letter sound mapping, our nonsense word, K through 3. And our reading fluency or our oral reading fluency, which is only administered to students in grades 1 through 3. So, you know, again, it's following that same trend that the percent of students who are at and above benchmark increased, not only in every single grade level, but it increased in every single measure at every single grade level. We saw some really significant growth again in first grade. So this aligned with why we saw a 10% overall increase at first grade. Almost 20% of our first graders who are at and above are demonstrating strong skills in phonemic awareness, which is, you know, if you follow about improvement, you know, the reading science, improvement science, that is one of the things that we are focusing on is those students and their phonemic awareness skills. So that's a great sign. Our decoding, again, our first graders, you know, 12% of them includes, you know, with their nonsense word fluency. So these are really positive signs, things that we want to see. That means that the interventions and the strategies that we are putting in place for our early learners are really starting to pay off, and we're seeing the benefit of all of the efforts that teachers are putting in place. So when we look at national comparisons, I just wanted to highlight a few things. So downward trends in school readiness at the beginning of the year as a result of COVID pandemic has reversed. So we're seeing the same thing in our MCAP data. When I shared that with you in October, I had talked about that we are actually not only returning to pre-pandemic, but we are actually superseding where we were pre-pandemic in reading. So looking at the national trend, we're following that trend as well with our early readers, not just our students in grades 3 through high school for our MCAP. So we're seeing that trend go across from kindergarten to high school, which is a really positive sign. This appears to be true for both students who are on track and ready and the students who are at risk needing intense intervention. And these trends are consistent across K to 3, across, you know, all of our student service groups. So really positive things that we are seeing come out of this assessment as far as how our early learners are doing with their reading. So if you look at the national trends beginning of year overall, so this green bar is our students who are on track, and those are our students who are demonstrating at the or above. These red bars are our students who are needing intense intervention or they're far behind. So these would be our students who are below or approaching the expectation. And you're seeing these trends from 2019 to 2024 with the, you know, exception here and there of increasing nationally across. And what we're looking for is this trending downward across time. So, you know, our district is actually experiencing, and I'll show you on the next slide, our district is actually experiencing a better trend than students are nationally, which is good to see. So I wanted to point out to you, so in this red and yellow, these are our students who are below and well below and below. When you see a downward arrow, that's a good sign. That means that we are decreasing students who are well below. And we also want to see a similar trend in our below. We are seeing that in grades 1 and 3. Our grade 2 and our grade kindergarten actually went up slightly, But the positive thing is actually they went down and are well below. So they still have a little bit more ground to make up, but we are actually seeing across the board that we are at least lowering all of our students who are in this well below. And then the positive thing is we saw that we increased both students who were at benchmark and above benchmark in when we correlate that to our national trends. So all of our students in each of our grade levels are actually performing better than the national trend of students who are at and above benchmark. So just, another positive thing to see that we are actually performing better than it talks about in the bottom here. How many students are, considered in the national trend or sample? So Board Member Harris had asked a question in October about summer slide. And so while our DIBELS assessment does not really focus on summer slide, I did want to provide 2 slides that speak to from another vendor that we use with our iReady platform, Curriculum Associates. They have looked at an executive summary of national findings on the summer slide. And if you look at across the top, our gray is our historic or our 19 data. The white bar is our 2021. Our green bar is spring 22 and our purple is our spring 2023. So what we're actually seeing is, looking at the percentage of students placing on grade level on phonics is within 1 to 5 percentage points of pre-pandemic levels in K-3, which that is supported by our DIBELS. And in grade 2, the percentage of students placing on grade level in phonics is 9% higher in 2023 than 2022, only 1 percentage point below pre-pandemic levels. So in answer to the question, we're not seeing a huge impact of summer slide on our students from where they end the year in June to where they begin the year in, I say September, because we only are here for a day or 2 in August. So, this is really positive that we want to see. So looking specifically at Prince George's County numbers, we're actually seeing summer gain across the board. And our national summer gain or loss based on 19's data. So, we're seeing positive signs across all of our grade levels in elementary school that not just K-3, that we are not experiencing a huge summer slide, or at least didn't from last year to this school year. So just wanted to share that information as well. So preliminarily, I'm going to continue with the good news for our benchmark data. So we did administer benchmark 1 to our students in the 4 core content courses. And so I just wanted to point out that in reading and math, we are now showing or displaying our reporting data using performance levels. So we have 4 performance levels. This matches what the state is doing for our state assessment and reading and math. Our 4 performance levels, while not named the same as the state, are very similar. So we have emerging and developing. So those would be our learners who are not quite yet meeting the standard. And then we have our on track and our advanced learner, who would be students who we don't call them proficient, but we say that they're on track because our benchmarks are not measuring grade level proficiency, but they're measuring meeting expectations for each quarter's standards. And so we have those 4 performance levels. There were approximately 162,000 students who took a reading and or a math benchmark assessment, which was nearly a 1,500 increase from last year. And then based on preliminary findings, there was measurable improvement from last year's benchmark 1 to this year's benchmark 1. So again, very positive sign. And I wanted to point out first that in mathematics, we actually saw a bigger improvement of our student scores across the board in mathematics than we did in reading. And that's not to say that we didn't grow in reading, but we actually had much more ground to make up in math because our benchmark scores have been much lower performing than our reading. So it's good to see that we made up a good 3% across the board in math. And speaking of math, we had every single grade level that showed improvement in elementary school, grade 7, and each one of our accelerated foundations, algebra, geometry, quantitative modeling, and algebra 2, each one of those courses and grade levels showed improvement. Grades 6 and 8 just remained unchanged. So they didn't actually lose any percentage. They just didn't gain from benchmark 1 last year to benchmark 1 this year. And then in reading, similar trend, we had grades 3, 4, and 5, grade 7, and our English 10 students improve, and then English 9 remain unchanged. So just so you can see a visual of that, remember this year we are reporting out by 4 performance levels. So we're looking for these 2 kind of light teal and dark teal bars to point us in the direction of our students who are on track or close to meeting expectations. Last year, that would have been somewhat equivalent to our green, our meeting expectations. So when you add up our students who are on track and our students who are advanced learners, we actually have in those grade levels I just mentioned to you, more students who are demonstrating meeting expectations than we did last year at this time in those grade levels. So very positive sign to see. And then in math as well. You know, unfortunately, we do still see a lot of this emerging and developing learner in math, the red and yellow bars. But again, we are making some really positive strides in every single grade level and course from last year this same time. So just speaks to, I think, how teachers are really using data to drive their instruction and their planning using this instructional data. And that is it for DIBELS and benchmark. So I will stop sharing. And I don't know, Dr. White, do you want to save questions until after we do the grade presentation, or do you want to open questions now for that presentation?
So I think I'll turn it over to the team. Would you like to ask questions about this now, or would you like to see grade presentation first?
I am flexible. If the team would like to ask questions now, I just want to remind everybody that we should be cognizant that there's another presentation and then we need to be done by 7. So team, what's your pleasure? Wait or do the questions now?
I'm fine to wait.
I'm fine to wait as well.
Great. Okay, so we'll just keep moving and then we'll ask our questions at the end. Thank you.
Sure, no problem. So I'll turn it over to Anthony Whittington, who I believe is doing the next presentation.
Good evening, Board of Education members. Thank you for this time. I will be brief so we can have time for questions for all 3 presentations. And I think Jamie's driving for me. All right, so our goal is simply today is to give a high-level overview of some of the positive trend patterns that we're experiencing for our school district around certain grade levels and across these core content areas. We give you data that represents pre-COVID, during the COVID heightening window, and then we'll call it post-COVID, as that's the best term we want to use for right now. Although we know some students are still experiencing remnants of COVID. The slides include representation from reading language arts, English language arts, mathematics, science, as well as social studies, final letter grade distribution, and the number of students that are enrolled in each of those courses for each year as well. We chose to go with the same criteria before of highlighting just 4 grade levels. 1, 5th grade, because they're exiting to the middle school. 8th grade, because they're finishing their middle school curriculum. And then 9th grade, because it's an accountability indicator, file state report cards, which will be displayed on mdreportcard.org on Wednesday at 12 noon. So you can take a look and see what the star rating is for each of our schools. And lastly, 10th grade, we focus on because college and career standards really start in those areas. So now let's talk a little bit about English. All right, as it relates to reading English language arts, a few observations here. This is grade 5 and it's color coded, as you see, with blue being A's and B's represented with green, and C, yellow, etc. going across. Therefore, for fifth grade, our district experienced an increase in students receiving A's and B's from SY22, 60%, to SY23, 65%. And our failures continue to decrease, which is a positive sign. If we look at grade 8, our district experienced similar increases in 8th grade, with a decrease in the percentage of D's and E's moving from 23% in SY22 to 17% in SY23, which is represented in the orange and red color coding displays. Moving to 9th grade, this poses a different conversation. As you know, the transition to 9th grade creates adjustments for many students. Now, our data story for 9th grade is not as favorable as the two that I previously mentioned. As you know, 9th grade is where most students start to bear credits, as well as the letter grading scale used for middle school is different than when students have moved to high school. In high school, the grading is a numeric grading scale. So with the English grade, 47% of the students in SY23 met a grade of a D or an E. And 9th grade in all of our core areas is a huge focus for our school district this year. If we move to 10th grade English, you'll see SY22 and SY23 grade distribution data is about identical as it relates to the comparison of grades E all the way through to A. And theirs is roughly a 1% increase in the students that are failing this course from year prior. Now let's look into mathematics and a few highlights here. In the area of grade 5 mathematics, we experienced an increase from school year 22, 85%, to school year 23, 88%. And that represents for those students receiving A's, B's, and C's. In grade 8, our district experienced similar increases, with a decrease in the percentage of D's and E's moving from 26% down to 23%, which is represented in the orange and yellow-red color coding. Back to our 9th grade, our data story for 9th grade mathematics shows a slight decrease in the number of students experiencing failures from SY22 to SY23. However, we are concerned with the lack of growth experience in this area. And again, keeping in mind the grading scale and criteria for middle school and high school is different. And therefore, that may attribute to why some of the grades are rather lower in 9th grade than 8th grade. If we look at 10th grade mathematics, you'll see SY22 and SY23 data trends to be almost identical, as 38% of students receive a grade of D or E in SY22 and 40% in SY23. Moving on to science highlights. In grade 5 science, we experienced an increase in the number of students receiving A's and B's from SY22, 71%, to SY23, 76%. And moreover, failures are decreased as well. Positive sign. In grade 8, we experienced similar increases, with the decrease in the percentage of D's and E's moving from 19% to 17%, which is represented again in the orange and red color coding. As it relates to grade 9, our data story for science is relatively identical as it relates to the grade distribution for SY22 and 23. with 29% in SY 22 and 28% in SY 23 receiving a failing grade. In grade 10, SY 22 and SY 23, the grade distribution tends to be almost identical as well. In comparison to the previous 9th grade slide, grade 10 experienced far less failures, with only 19% reporting a final grade of E for SY 22 as well as SY 23. And lastly, social studies highlights. We are experiencing an increase in the number of students receiving A's and B's from SY 22, 73% to SY 23, 78%. While failures are also decreasing in this area. Thank you, grade 5. For grade 8, we experienced similar increases. And there is an increase in the percentage of students moving in the A's and the B's category. And they're moving from 55% all the way to 59%. Grade 8. Now, grade 9, as we move into our social studies conversation, the rate of failures started to increase steadily from SY 22 at 28% to now a high of 32%, which is something that we're, again, our district is focused on 9th grade, strengthening all core areas. And lastly, in grade 10, SY 22 and SY 23 grade distribution appeared to be very similar. In comparison to previous 9th grade slide, grade 10 experienced far less failures with only 20%. As opposed, you remember the slide before, 32%, we received 20% reported failures in SY 22 as well as SY 23. And we know that failure is not an option. So we're going to work to decrease this data point as well. The next slide, I think I'm going to turn that over to Jamie.
So in the presentation, we also wanted to include a grade distribution analysis that included the 4 major contents, but looking at all of our grades, 2 through 12. So this link is actually given to you in the presentation, but I'll just click through just to show you one page. So math grade 2, reading grade 2, science grade 2, and social studies grade 2 are all on one page in the addendum. And so you can look at the end count or number of students, the percent of A's, B's, C's, D's, and E's across the top. And then we've broken it down by our student groups for each grade level. Just a reminder, pre-kindergarten through grade 1 are not included in the addendum because the variation of how their final grades are calculated and reported. Pre-K reports on a numbers level scale, and kindergarten grade 1 report on a standards base scale, and those examples are shown below. And then one last slide, we wanted to point you in the direction of an update to our administrative procedure 5121, which are our grading policy. Beginning in school year 24, there were revisions made to this administrative procedure. Grading and reporting changes took effect at the beginning of this school year. This administrative procedure provides guidance to administrators and teachers and implementation of the grading reporting systems in pre-K through 12. And then future grade distribution results based on our changes to our administrative procedure will follow a newly established trend based on the updates to the policy. But 2 key important revisions that we want to point out as a note. So the first one is aligned to high school final grade calculation. That methodology was looked at to be comprehensively similar to our surrounding school districts. So we are converting the use of quarterly letter grades as opposed to using numeric percentage points starting this school year moving forward. This will ensure Prince George's County's grading policy is kept consistent with neighboring school districts' grading procedures, and it also keeps the district's grading policy consistent from grades 2 through 12. Another important point about our administrative procedure change was aligned to high school letter grade cut scores. And that is also looking at surrounding districts by changing the cut score from 6 percentage point, 0.6 of the percentage points to 0.5 of a percentage points when you're obtaining a letter grade of D. So this will also ensure that Prince George's County grade ranges are consistent from letter grades A through E. And it will also keep the district's grade cut scores consistent with neighboring school districts. So we thought why this is important is when students are applying for colleges, applying for jobs, we want to make sure that our school district is in line with all of our neighboring school districts to ensure that we are providing an equitable procedure and practice for our students that other students in our surrounding districts are experiencing. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing, and I believe we're going to open it up to questions.
All right, thank you, colleagues. Thank you, admin staff. So colleagues, we'll start with questions and we'll go with the first round and then go from there. Vice Chair Pamela Boozer-Strother.
Thank you so much, Chair Miller, and thank you for the presentation. Really appreciated how the data flowed and how I could track it. So thank you so much. Can we start with what you ended with on this grade policy? I've been a little taken aback by some of the comments I've seen on this from educators in a couple of different forums. There seems to be a sense that we are becoming less rigorous, that we are not holding students accountable enough with this change. And I hear you use equity with neighboring districts. So if you could just, can you go a little deeper about what the problem was, why this change came about, who changed it, and what this means for PGCPS students? And were we the only district impacted? I think this came from MSDE. If you could explain a little more, I would appreciate it.
So this is Doug Strader, the voice from beyond. I can't get my video working. So I can initiate this conversation. We began this process. We pull folks together on a regular basis to review our APs. And we have a grading and reporting committee that was pulled together to look at our current practices. And it was discovered that we were out of alignment from some of our neighboring districts. What has transpired as a result of the policy changes had actually nothing to do with watering down our standards. It has, what the reactions that we're experiencing from teachers are really somewhat out of line for what this actual purpose is. Looking at our high schools, what we've dealt with from quarter to quarter, we've used a point system in the past, which means that we're taking the quarter grades, the percentage points for each quarter grade, and we take the average of those 4 quarter grades to come up with a final grade. What we were realizing is that this is not the typical grading system that's being used by our surrounding districts. Everyone surrounding us are all using letter grades for each of the 4 quarters. And they're using the 1 to 4 traditional unweighted scale to come up with final grade calculations. The grade change in the AP occurred prior to my coming to Prince George's County Public Schools, so I can't speak to the history of it. But what I can speak to is our research that we've done of all the surrounding districts. So what was happening is, actually, one of the ways that this came to our attention, we had a situation with a student which caused us to look at several other students, of which the student was transferring into our district. And when they were transferring, looking at the grades that they had and the percentages that they had, we couldn't we couldn't make the direct correlation with the grades that we were assigning here. So for instance, if a student is sitting in Algebra 1 and DC city schools or in Montgomery County Public Schools, let's say they got the exact same assignments, the same grades, and looking at the calculation of how the quarter grades were being aggregated, there is a chance that a student could end up with a lower grade in Prince George's County than the student was receiving in Montgomery County or DC or Anne Arundel County or Charles County or Calvert County, any county surrounding us. We were very unique in our calculations. So that caused us to do the research. We're trying to figure this out. And then after we discovered where our issues were, that's when we aligned ourselves with our surrounding counties. So this wasn't an attempt on our part to try to loosen up requirements or anything of the sort. This was something we discovered and we rectified it when it was brought to our attention. So that was the history behind this. Anthony has done some presentations on this, and he could share some slides if you want to get into more of the details of how the aggregations have worked in the past. We'd be willing to share those with you at some point in time. But that's pretty much just summing it up, and my colleagues can jump in if I've missed any points.
And that's very helpful to me. That's a little more information than I had, because I think I was also tracking that MSDE came down with something new in grading. Is that accurate, or is that not accurate for this to start this school year?
I'm not aware of that. Dr. White can chime in if she is.
You may be talking about the end of the year assessment, Doug.
Oh, yeah. And that was the other reason for the convening of our grading and reporting committee. So the end of year, yes. So we do have the end of course assessments for high school, the two that are going to be impacting our students this upcoming year. But that really is independent of the policy that you were discussing, the piece of the policy that you were discussing. And that is, the change of how we're calculating the final grades, we're aggregating the final grades, as well as that secondary. So the EOC piece for those two specific courses at the high school level, they're going to contribute to the student's overall final grade as basically like a final exam grade. So again, for only those two specific courses, that's applicable. But for the other policy pieces you were discussing, that's applicable for all courses. So now we're using the same quarter calculation to final grade through elementary, middle, and high school. We can spend a little bit more time on the EOC if you wish.
I mean, I guess I just want to put what you're saying in context. But what you're saying is this end of course assessments, that's Blueprint, Pillar 3, college and career ready assessments. Is that what you're talking about, or no?
No. So
Okay.
high school, you may be familiar with what used to be referenced as the high school assessments, the HSAs, where you were required to pass the 4 content areas, English 10, Algebra 1, biology, and government. So now they've done away with that program. Passing our assessments is no longer required, but for an accountability measure for biology and government in particular, for those two courses, MSDE is now required what is called an EOC, an end of course assessment. So that end of course assessment now gets aggregated as 20% of the student's final grade. So there's no longer a requirement to pass, but it does play a role in the calculation of their final grade, again, only for that life science course and the government course. Now, those two courses are also indifferent than college and career readiness you were talking about. They're outside of Blueprint. So no, this was just a remnant of trying to hold students accountable for that high school assessment program.
Yeah. And I will make a commentary, and this is why everyone is confused about Pillar 3, college and career readiness, and why there's probably so limited engagement in MSD's call for survey responses, like 600 people across this entire state. And I'm sitting here as a board member trying to piece together which end of year assessments we're talking about. So I know that the state board put CCR on a little bit of a pause, and the topic I'm going to bring up next after my colleagues is going to be algebra, because that is so central to it. But I'll stop here. Thank you so much.
Sure thing.
Thank you. Any other questions? When I come back, I wanted to get some clarity on that AP 5121, because I know you explained it, but I want my other colleagues to have a chance to ask their questions, but I was trying to figure it out visually. Board Member Judy Mickens-Murray.
Thank you. I was looking at the scores with reading and science and social studies for 9th grade. And when I was on the board before, we were always concerned with 9th graders. And it seems as though that issue is still alive and well. So how do we help these youngsters to move academically? And I get it. I had a grandson that when he was in the 9th grade, we really had to get a tutor for him, because going from elementary, middle school to 9th grade, it was a shock on so many levels. So what are we doing in our system to help these young folks to, I guess, adjust first to high school, and then to take, I guess, their academics not seriously, but to be able to be involved with academics without feeling like they just were stupid, didn't learn anything or whatever? Anybody?
Kia, were you gonna, I'll jump in. I didn't know if you were gonna say anything.
I was just gonna mention the transitional summer programs for students coming from middle school to, excuse my voice, from middle school to high school, to just get them prepared for high school. And that is, you obviously focus on academics, but they also get to know some of the teachers in the buildings. They get to meet students as they're coming in. Also, of course, we have tutoring available for our students at every grade level, but specifically at the high school level, allowing students to participate in small group tutoring in mathematics, as well as virtual tutoring in any subject where they might need support. We do have specific courses in 9th grade to really help students that may be struggling, as identified on any of their mathematics or English assessments. So our English lab courses and our Algebra 1 lab course really serve as an additional built-in during the day instructional support for students that we don't see performing on grade level as they're coming into high school, to make sure that they are successful in 9th grade.
Okay, also, do you identify the students that may need that additional help, or is it strictly voluntary from parents?
Oh yeah, it's definitely not voluntary. We do identify students just based on their past performance, and as they're entering into 9th grade, and really targeting those students that we identify to make sure that they get that support initially before they even fall behind.
Okay.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I will let you finish.
No, I was just saying that we just want to make sure that we are keeping them on track from the very beginning before they're falling behind. So it's not a remediation, but that we're keeping them on track from the very beginning.
Now, what is voluntary is the actual tutoring opportunities that we have. So we do identify students and we send additional information home, and students and parents can sign up. That portion is voluntary. And to Board Member Buda Struthers talked about college and career readiness. I'm actually meeting with several colleagues across the district, because that pillar that she's referencing touches so many of our shops. So we're looking at all the big topics in there. Is like, what do we have now in place? What does Blueprint say we have to get to, and where is that gap? So for example, let's just say, and part of things I make up, but let's just say our lab course that we can offer that schools choose to put that lab course in. And if we identify that we have to have certain courses or certain frameworks for students who are not meeting CCR, then it could be that we have to say that every single school must offer that, and every single student who's not CCR must be backed with an algebra lab to an algebra class. So that's what we're truncating to come together to do, so that when we move forward in 24, 25, we're closer to the demands of what Blueprint is asking versus, oh, you know, if you have extra time in your schedule, you know, schools that want to, schools that choose to, versus what we must do in order to meet the demands of Blueprint.
Okay, thank you. One final question. The data, can that data be desegregated by school? And maybe that's a Dr. Strader question. For the board members in their districts, can District 9 get their information by school data? Anybody?
Yeah, I can respond, or Dr. Bowers can respond too. The answer to that is yes. So the data that we're talking about here, remember during one of the board meetings, I shared the CSI dashboards that we've rolled out. Much of this data that we're sharing tonight is actually included in those dashboards. And those dashboards, one of the filters on those dashboards is your district numbers. So yes, you can go in, you can filter on district, you can filter on schools, you can see the majority of this information.
Okay, let me ask you this. Is there a workshop or something that a board member can sign up for so someone can teach them how to do what you just said?
Yes, we can do that, but you'll be surprised how easy it is to do. It's just a matter of just selecting filters. So I would suggest try. We'll forward you the link to it. And if you have any issues, feel free to reach us, but it's pretty straightforward. But again, we're here to help.
Okay, I'll ask you to do this. Forward the link to myself and all the board members, and then I'll make it a contest of who can do it first. Okay?
What we'll do, I'll talk to Dr. Strader offline though, is try to find a time where we can offer, even if it's just an hour, you know, a couple of drop-in sessions for support. So try your way. Let's see how, and then when we get to the new year, I'll ask him if we can set up a couple.
I appreciate
Absolutely.
it. Thank you so much. That's all.
Whatever's most efficient for you guys, we can take care of it.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Judy, can I add one statement as well? As it relates to, I have a heart for the 9th grade as well, because that is the gateway. As how we start is how we finish. And 9th grade is a challenge, not just in Prince George's County, but nationally. I'm trying to move students from 9th to 10th successfully, because when they move successfully, they go on to graduate. The minute they're retained, it becomes a challenge getting them out of school. Basically, when you're retained, only 30% of them go on to graduate. That's nationally. A few things we have in place. One thing that is going to be helpful. The grading scale changing is going to be helpful. Let me tell you why. Because over the past several years, let's say Anthony is in Algebra 1, and I start with a 20%. Quarter 1, I got a 20%. I don't get a letter grade, I get a percent, 20%. The next quarter, I get a 30%. I have now 50 points, and I need to get to 240 points in order to receive a D. So what's the likelihood of Anthony getting a 95 for quarter 3 and a 95 for quarter 4 in order to get a D? So we have found students mid-year that said, hey, I failed already. What's the use of me either going to class or me giving my best effort because I know I'm not going to pass? When the grading scale moved from 50 to 40 to 30 to 20 to 10, it made it much more difficult for students to be successful when they start slowly. Whereas now with letter grading, I can start with the E, I can get another E, but if I come back with a C and a C, I'm going to pass. Right. It keeps you in the game, and it keeps you more interested in learning in this course because you can see potentially your success at the end exiting the class. In addition, as we spoke to before, we have a cohort tracker. Our cohort tracker looks at every student that is a high school student in all of their areas as it relates to graduation criteria, from testing to student service hours to their core courses. I'm sorry, actually every course that they take, and if they're getting a failing grade in any course, it'll be colored red. And so you'll see that that's something we can show you offline, that you can see every student's grade and how well they're doing. So the professional school counselors go in there on a regular basis, and they're looking at students that are off track at this particular time to support them getting on track. I'm sorry.
No, I appreciate that additional
Right.
information, and what you've said to me, it gives hope. So you're keeping hope alive for students. I appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And you answered my question. You gave me a visual. So now I get it. I get the difference between the first and the second in terms of how you're changing the AP. I get it. Thank you. A quick question about the assessment. Biology and government, who is responsible for writing the assessment? Is the state writing the end of course assessment, or are they leaving it up to every LEA to write the end of course assessment?
There's state developed assessments.
Okay.
And just as note, Prince George's County, the state is actually has recommended a cohort model for implementing the end of course 20% of the final grade. So this current school year, the only students who are impacted by that are first-time ninth graders. So we have very, very few first-time ninth graders that are taking biology or that take US government. So we have very minimal students who will be impacted by that 20% end of course this year. But next year, it'll be first-time ninth graders and then 10th graders. So we have all of our students taking biology and a majority of our 10th graders taking US government. So next year is when we will see a much bigger impact of our students taking those end of course assessments for those two courses and how they score and how that gets calculated as 20% into their final course grade for those
And
two
it's
courses.
LSN, Jamie. You
Right.
said US, LSN.
LSN, sorry.
Uh-huh.
Any other questions, board members? Go ahead, Vice Chair.
Thank you. Can we go back to the benchmark slide on math? I think it was your new data.
Sure.
It showed a lot of red in 8th grade. So, yeah, I think the trend, there's been something about this cohort. And I think I keep going to it because I think you all know I live a case study on this cohort. I personally have an 8th grader and have followed what happened being in distance learning for 5th grade math. And it's like, it still seems to be quite an impact. And it's not the only grade band. I see her 6th grade seems to have an impact too. And now, of course, I'm thinking about the CCR pathways. There's the 2 proposed pathways. The one that algebra has, an A, B, or C in algebra has a much more significant impact on the end of 10th grade, your GPA. You might have the great GPA, the 3.0, but you haven't earned, it's math that's holding you up, this algebra, and that may delay your access to the CCR pathways. And it seems like we can, at least from my vantage point, it looks like we could kind of see this coming. Sorry. That there's a large group that could be impacted early on when we reach that point. So I guess Dr. White, I'm thinking about, as you had mentioned, thinking about these CCR pathways and the planning for that. I'm curious how you're thinking about it at this point. I know the final decision hasn't been made, but what are you thinking?
Right now, I think that I have to have all voices at the table, which is why we're getting together tomorrow, because we have to understand where we are. There's something that happens in 6th grade, and there's something that happens because when you look at the students in 7th grade, they're performing way better, and they get to 8th grade and then they plummet. So it's either something to me with the standards, what the expectation is, the deeper of the knowledge. 6th grade is the same. So when you come from that 5th grade to 6th grade, there's some shift that occurs in standards. And so all we want to just keep breaking that apart. We know our middle schools is where we have many vacancies. So we have to take time to dig through that, who's with the certified teacher. We know that ultimately great teaching every single day. So I don't care if we can put all the tricks out the bag we want, but the best thing that you're going to do to raise student achievement is have great teaching in every classroom every single day. So we keep trying to ensure that teachers understand content, understand pedagogy, understand how to teach students, because that's rough. We could have a body there, but if they don't understand themselves, to get students to the level and rigor of the standard. The other thing is that we're really focusing on writing, because we're identified that even in mathematics on an assessment like this, our students are not writing. And it's a big component of their assessment. So we try to mirror that on benchmarks, and we're seeing that same trend on benchmarks. So we use benchmarks as a tool to work with our teachers. Our math team goes back and works with all of the teachers on their data, on what that means, who those kids are, and naming kids by subgroup. So males, females, African-American, our white students, our Hispanic students, our ESOL students, our special education, and try to then, how do you go back and cycle back through, scaffold that standard to try to make sure that kids are constantly getting those areas that they struggle. So my team is all in the data. I love Doug's team because they met with them already. They've broken apart all the data, and then we go back to curriculum and we go back to teachers and we talk about what that can look like. In terms of blueprint, I think it goes back to the piece that we have to figure out is, again, before you get kids there, like there's so many components of blueprint. The GPA is going to help us tremendously, because your GPA, which I think our team has tried to demonstrate over the last couple of years when we brought GPA, is based on what you're given and what you're provided every single day versus a benchmark or a state assessment is just one moment in time. And so we try to make sure that students are getting that richness every single day. And so that'll grab more students for us. We'll know better as we continue to work, but it's going to be hard because when the state gives us data, how do we plan? So we build schedules in January, we take state assessments in June, we get data back in the summer. We've already built schedules. So then who are the kids you're identifying? And then when and how do you plan for them when you've already built a schedule the year before? So it's going to be a lot of pieces that the state can't answer that we're all trying to figure out in order to appropriately put students on the right path for CCR. And then how do you still provide students, those that want that advancement and those opportunities, a way to still get that regardless of a CCR?
Yeah, thank you so much for adding that context, because I think that's also part of the knowledge gap is if the one that I think for PGCPS we really want to demonstrate in that first big year of declaring CCR at the end of 10th grade. Like we want PGCPS to come out looking strong, right? That many of our students qualified, but it's that piece of the what happens next if you didn't. And I use that one example of that algebra may be the one thing.
And it was really hard to plan. It was really hard to plan even before now because we're waiting for what's the final criteria. And so every time we try to plan, it's like, oh, now it's something else. Okay, scrap that. Who are the kids? Scrap that. Who are now the kids? Scrap that. Who? So it's really hard. Like when I've reached out, my team will tell you, we're like, okay, how is Howard County? What's Anne Arundel? What's Montgomery? All of us are in the same situation because we're waiting for somebody to say, this is the criteria, and then we need answers to other things. So we have our associate suit meetings. We're all of us all attend, and we're like, okay, and we're all asking the same questions. How do we figure out this part? How do we deal with students who are in advanced placement? How do we deal with students who are IB? So it's a lot of questions that we're all trying to process and answer at the same time.
Yeah, I appreciate that because I'm also now following the state board meetings more closely and the AIB more closely at this juncture because I'm watching the advisory committee. There's advisory committees that are meeting. And I listened to one last month on college and career readiness, and there were members of the advisory committee having complete, crises over what did we do here about 10th grade CCR, which I have to say all through Kerwin, how far we've come, a lot of it has made sense to me. Like I have appreciated it in the CTE expansion and everything wrapped around it. But I am seeing the I appreciate where you are as the experts in the systems and how difficult this is going to be after listening to even some folks who were selected for advisory committees reach this point.
Yeah, and I would say the reason why I really want to approach it from what does it say we must do? So what are we doing? Where do we need to go and what's the gap? Because sometimes we will have so much legislation that's driving what we're doing that we're not doing anything because you can't do everything and do it well. And so that's why oftentimes if I come, you'll hear me push back on certain things because I know, yeah, if I can take that on, the moment I take that on and I don't take anything else off, it's just one more thing we're doing. But if we really want to move our students, we've got to be strategic about what we're going to do well and where we're going to put our investments. For example, we've already done budget, like we're in budget now, right? For a year that I'm trying to figure out what they're going to decide with the law, but make something make sense to what we currently have so that we can keep that going and advance it even farther. So it's so many decisions that I have to process along with Doug's team and the school side to make it make sense. And on top of that, then we have CSI and TSI, right? Which is a whole nother set. So it's a lot of competing factors.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Any other questions? I know I have one as my colleagues may be thinking of their questions. I was wondering when you talked about the benchmarks, you mentioned that now you are measuring it using the 4 performance levels. So with the benchmarks, let me see how to ask this question. I know that the benchmark just measures the standards for that particular quarter. So are you comparing apples to apples? So if a teacher says, my student performed above the proficiency level quarter 1, did the same thing quarter 2, did the same thing quarter 3, is that an indication that they probably will do well on MCAP?
So yes and no to your question.
Okay.
More so in math than in reading. There are spiraled standards. So on benchmark 1 and benchmark 2, there are standards that are assessed across both of those. So in that way, we encourage teachers to look at it from the mindset that you're looking at is, did students improve from benchmark 1 to 2? Because it's usually an extension of the standard. In reading, much less so. Usually benchmark 1 is assessing different standards than 2. So we ask schools more to look at a comparison of benchmark 1 last year to benchmark 1 this year for that purpose. However, benchmark 1 and 2 as a combination can tell a story about a student in predicting how they may perform on the state assessment in May. Our office has preliminarily looked at, now we have 2 years of MCAP data and we have several years of our benchmark data. And so last year we did 1 predictability study looking at our benchmarks and are they accurately predicting how students are going to perform. And a lot of our grade levels across reading and math, we were talking about single-digit percentage points of predictability. Specifically English 10. Our English 10 benchmark actually did a really very close job in predicting how our students ended up doing on our spring MCAP assessment this past spring. So yes and no to your question. There are some comparability across benchmarks to look at. But when you're assessing different standards, it's not always best to look at if a student, improved from 1 to 2, it might just be because they, were taught different standards and did, better on that set of standards than they had in the prior benchmark.
Yeah, and that's why we have within the curriculum, other milestones and that we stop and measures that we look at, because you could be off pace for a benchmark, right? So you might be taking a benchmark and then, but you had 2 more weeks for whatever reason that you got off. You know, our teachers, I'm so proud of our teachers and the work that they're doing, the commitment they're making. Like when you look at our data and now that we're really back in person, when you see all the arrows going up, it just shows you the trajectory is that we're moving in the right direction. And I will say it forever, is that great teaching every day in every classroom is what's going to be the measure. And how do we support our teachers? How do we take their input, you know, when we're building out and making adjustments, because actually they're the ones out teaching. So I'm excited about just the opportunities to continue to grow.
And that makes sense. Thank you for breaking it down, but that does make sense. It does make sense. And I do want to echo kudos to the teachers in the classroom, your team, the accountability team, because looking at the progress across the board, I know you meaning the school system, were moving in reading English language arts, but to see the progress in mathematics is so encouraging. So I would like to ask what did you do? And I know it's great teaching in the classroom, but I'm sure there was a lot of work around making sure the teachers were ready, making sure that they looked at the curriculum. So if you can, I don't know if you can pinpoint one thing, but just kudos to what you did in math to help move math, because I think many districts are still trying to figure out what to do in the area of mathematics.
Well, I want to first just thank our school side under Dr. Davis, originally Dr. Helen Coley, and now Dr. Rasheen Davis, because we set forth 8 goals in front of you. I think it was last year where we started and we talked about what's the culture of mathematics for our school system. What do we believe our kids can do? The efficacy about what the expectation of what they should do every single day. What are the conversations that are happening? How are we utilizing collaborative planning? This year, we've taken that deeper and really breaking apart our ESOL and our special education students. What professional development are we offering? This year, we've added that we're moving back to having math professional development during the day as well as in the evening. So I think we've been doing informal observations, formal observations, and learning walks in our schools. Our school sides are in those classrooms talking to teachers. Any of us, when we go out to buildings, the one class we are all going to be committed to going into is a mathematics classroom and coming back and having conversations about it. Our principals are working on what should feedback look like and what should they be talking to teachers about. And so not to pinpoint one thing, but I think it's making a commitment to say we're doing something, that we're going to name it, that we're going to talk about it, that it's not going to be this thing that we all know exists and it's the elephant in the room that no one's talking about. Math is a civil right and it has to get better or we are doing a disservice to our children. And we're all committed to getting better. So my colleagues, while they're not on this call, we work like a wheel. It's like a relay, you know, students testing team gets the data ready. We look at it, we make provisions. The teachers go back in, the area office is right behind them, following them through, and we keep repeating that cycle. And so we just have to stay committed on doing that cycle and every year tweaking to make that commitment, not changing the goals. But you see how I said we took the same goals and then we went deeper. So next year it's about how do we take those now and go deeper in those goals so that teachers become very proficient in what they're doing.
Thank you. Love it. I want to just pose to board chair. I don't know what we can do because I think that, you know, not many constituents may watch the Academic Achievement Committee meeting, but I do know that they watch the board meetings. And is there a way to celebrate this progress? You know, this is what the school system is about. And the teams have really taken a step forward. I don't want to misrepresent the language. We may need to get the language from the team, but I think it's worth, I know it's worth a celebration for the public to know that what has been put in place by the academics office, by the division Division of Schools, Office of
School Support and Leadership.
School Support and Leadership, coupled with professional development, what they have done to really move students in math and then continue the growth in language arts. So if there's something we can do to ensure that it's celebrated publicly, I would appreciate that.
Okay, I will commit to work with you, Dr. Zipporah Miller, to see if we can't make that happen.
Well,
Okay.
we need Dr. White on this too, because I want to make sure the
You
language
may
is correct.
invite anybody that you want, but I'll start
Okay.
the conversation with you.
Okay, all right. Sorry, Vice Chair Pamela Buzestrada, I see your hand has been up. I apologize.
Oh, that's all right. I just wanted to thank Dr. White for reminding us about pacing when it comes to benchmarks, because I totally get that and I'd forgotten to look at the data with pacing in mind. So I appreciate you bringing that up, because I know we'll see a shift as pacing gets on track. So I just want to say I appreciate it.
All right, any more questions? Go ahead. Go ahead, Board Chair.
I don't have a question, but I want to compliment this group. I think this was a very good presentation. As usual, I am never disappointed when I come to the academic meeting. You really work in depth, you give us insight, and you keep it real. And that's what I appreciate the most, is that you keep it real. We know where the foundation is, we know how far we have to move. But I'm so impressive that we made progress. So thank you so much. Definitely appreciate that. And we will figure out how to celebrate this. Okay, thank you.
Hey, if there aren't any more questions, what I'd like to do is first thank Dr. White and the Division of Academics, to thank Dr. Strader and the Division of Accountability for a thorough presentation and just a great conversation around data and what progress you've made with students and what you're doing to continue the progress. So I just want to thank you. And we are committed to celebrate the success, because we know that this work is just going to continue to get better. So thank you so much. So I would like to make a motion to adjourn.
I move to
You move
adjourn go ahead, Board Member Jackson.
I move to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. So this meeting is adjourned at 6:53 p.m. Thank you again and have a wonderful evening.